Almost every business you see in Cameroon could use a serious boost in their financial sourcing. The need for financing is especially dire for small and medium-sized enterprises in Cameroon and startups. These businesses are the backbone of Cameroon's economy, contributing to over 35% of our gross domestic product and employing more than 75% of our labor force. Yet, every day, a local business in Cameroon is closing its doors for lack of financing. Unfortunately, we are not in the West or in the United States, nor are we large multinationals where our government can come to bail us out. Even when financing is available from outside investors, our companies most often don't fall within the threshold or the barème for which foreign investors want to put in money. Let me paint the picture for you. According to GICAM's 2016 report, Cameroon has 203,000. According to GICAM's 2016 report, Cameroon has 203,000 registered enterprises, and of these, 79 are very small enterprises and another 20% are small enterprises. What this means is 95% or rather 98% of our annual turnover for these companies is between 1 million and 250 million francs CFA. This is well below the 3 billion threshold for foreign investors. Let me explain further. If, say, a foreign investor wanted to invest in Cameroon, only the paperwork and the processes, if they were to give you, say, a 20 or a 10 million that most of our SMEs would require, would exceed that amount. So they want to invest in projects that are huge, ranging in the billions of francs CFA. And yet, our local companies don't even make that in a year. So they don't fall within the realm or within the barème for which these investments can benefit them. The challenges for assessing finance for both SMEs and startups in Cameroon has been on the debate table for a long time. Well, my guest for today is a financial expert. His experience spans many years and across several continents. He is known as Ayok Akwachare Chemone. He is the executive director of ACE Foundation. I am very thrilled to have him on the program with us today. You're welcome, sir.
Thank you, Richard.
This is, I think, the second time we're meeting. I don't know if you would know that. The first time we met, I just saw you doing some really interesting work. But I have been able to go through your profile, and you have quite an interesting resume. But let me start by asking, as Executive Director for ACE Impact Foundation, what's your vision with that?
Well, thank you, Richard. In fact, I came up with the idea of ACE Foundation because of a critical problem which we have in our Cameroonian economy. I've seen lots of small enterprises die because of lack of funding. I've seen lots of young guys with brilliant ideas, but they can't launch them because of lack of funding. I've seen so many initiatives being killed, or I can say having a stillbirth because of lack of funding. And then I realized that, look, you have funding somewhere which is highly available, and you have people who are usually in need, and it's just that the two can't meet. So what can you do to facilitate those who have access of capital to deploy this capital to those who are in need of capital? Because finance is all about the optimal allocation of funds from those who have excess of it to those who are in need of it. And I decided to come up with the ACE Foundation because I realized that the solution, this is a critical, what we call a systemic issue. So it's not just about having a financial institution, it's about addressing the whole systemic problem. So I came up with ACE Foundation as a means of addressing the problems from the different levels, as the whole problem from end to end.
So what exactly on a practical level does ACE Impact do? How do you source the enterprises that need the funds and then network them with, say, the investors?
Okay, that's a good question. So there are a lot of things that we do, but I'll put them in just about three different pillars, three different areas. Now, the first thing is to identify those who are in need of this funding and prepare them to be able to get this funding in terms of getting their books ready, their financial, because you can't just access, you can't just go and access this funding without some preparation. And that's one of the key issues. It's not just that there's lack of funding, but because most of these enterprises are not ready to access some of this funding. That's the truth about it. So you need to, first of all, get them to be ready by helping them to clean up their books and arrange things so that, the potential investor can be ready to put in his or her money into this particular venture. Now, the second part where we look at this is we try to now advertise this, showcase these opportunities to those who have, fund to the investor, the potential investor. So sometimes, I travel out of Cameroon to showcase some of what the local guys are doing to whet the appetite of these investors that look the opportunities in Cameroon, come to Cameroon, and you see a lot of these opportunities. Now, the third part, it's all about also trying to come up with the right investment vehicles, because in Cameroon we know only of banks, but banks are not the only source of funding. You need other financial vehicles to move funding from those who have access of it to those who have those who are in need of the funding. So and that's the most important pillar, trying to set up these vehicles. So I'll talk a lot about the vehicles which we're trying to create on this. That will be the key focus, the vehicles that will help to move funds from where you have excess of it to where there's a need of it. Yeah.
Now, in Cameroon, statistics show that just about 14.2% of our SMEs or our startups do proper accounting. And you have mentioned that that is one of the problems that we face. Now, these companies don't see the need to maybe pay an accountant, check the books regularly, have an updated balance sheet, and all of these issues that investors want to see. They run their businesses most often spur of the moment, or just the way they are used to it. But these are issues that investors want. Do you think that we can shape the mentality or change the processes for the investors, that they accept us the way we are? Or do we need necessarily to train people, especially SMEs and startups, to start learning how to keep their books, especially considering that sometimes it's very costly to be able to do proper accounting?
There's no way that the SMEs can run away from this problem. There's no investor who will come and put his or her money into a business that doesn't keep records. So the only solution for the SMEs, and that's what I try to push my clients to, is to try to start keeping your books clean. You don't need to show that you're making a profit, no. You just need to show that there's someone responsible for looking after the books and providing the controls in place to give the confidence. So all this is about building the confidence of the investors and reducing the risk profile of the company.
Now, in Cameroon, there are discrepancies with funding, especially in terms of the financial needs. Most companies don't just need fiscal cash. They also need technical assistance. They need financing that is cheap. They need financing also that is long-term. But then if you look at the product life, or the company life cycle rather, for most of these companies, most of them don't survive the first decade. So how do they begin to get long-term invest or funding or financial sources when they cannot even survive the short term?
Well, that's a good question. I think the investment vehicles, like right now we're trying to set up a venture capital fund that can put in patient capital into some of these enterprises, the small and medium-sized enterprises, because that's what they need. What they need is patient capital, money that can, over a long period of time, money that you don't need to start reimbursing from the next month, money that can wait and see your business grow and become something before you start reimbursing. So That's what I was talking about, having the right
vehicles,
the right investment vehicles. Because if you don't have the right investment vehicles, there's a high temptation that you go and take money from somewhere which doesn't meet your needs. So the first thing is to look at what's the needs of these entrepreneurs or enterprises, small enterprises, and then identify the vehicles that tend to meet this particular set of needs. And then now you can match these needs to the investment vehicles. But unfortunately, we've come to know of only banks, but banks are not wicked. They're merely performing their fiduciary duty by ensuring that they don't just give money to companies that won't stay for over a long period of time, and then the loans go bust. So they have to ensure that the companies which they put in their money, that they lend money to, because remember, it's not the bank's money, it's depositors' money. So they have a responsibility to ensure that before the person or the company that they gave this money to is capable of paying back this money. So it's not just out of pity that they should give to SMEs, because you always hear the complaint that, oh, banks don't lend money to SMEs. No. Meanwhile, there are people who can lend money, who are willing to take that risk for
take it away from the banks.
Yeah, from the banks. And these are the kind of vehicles which we're trying to set up. You have things like impact funds. So we have, which will perform some of the duties of venture capital, as well as venture philanthropy funds. So these are the kind of things which are still new in our market and which we're trying to bring here, so that at the end of the day, people who have ideas and who need patient capital can
be able to access.
Be able to access.
Generally, our financial market is still very young and in most ways immature.
Yeah.
And now we are faced with standards that are universal, and these investors want A, or they want B. They have to go by the books, but it's not something that we are used to. And you have clearly stated that it's not that the banks are wicked, but then aren't there opportunities where, based on our prevailing circumstances, there are countries like in Nigeria, for example, where you can mortgage your car against a loan, and the banks will give you. In Cameroon, sometimes, even when you have assets or collateral, and sometimes they want the matricle. You have to be a civil servant. So aren't the banks wicked? And if there are alternative sources for financing, where would we find them?
There are so many alternatives, and I'll start by your second question, where would we find the alternatives? I'll just give you an example. I was in Washington, D.C., and there you could see that there's a chunk of about $1 billion which the World Bank and other financial institutions have put for women entrepreneurs. Now you have countries like Kenya, Nigeria, Ghana, trying to tap into this pot of money because it's to help the female entrepreneurs. And we know that, female entrepreneurs are a big opportunity in sense of, they're big growth opportunity in Africa. But due to ignorance, we in Cameroon can't tap into this kind of funds. So what my institution does is to try to look around, scout around to see where there are low-hanging fruits in terms of funding, and try to channel them into the market, such that you could have, those in Cameroon can tap into this. A second example, you have lots of people, lots of money being put for sustainable development goals, the achievement of sustainable development goals by the year 2030, what we call the 2030 agenda. You have the 17 goals, and a lot of them are related to social issues. So you have entrepreneurs who want to solve social issues, but they don't know how to tap into this kind of funding. So we're there now to see, that's why I call it like an intermediary, to see how you can move these funds from where they are, which they can meet some of the needs locally, and introduce them to these local entrepreneurs. The third important point, which is, a current case I was working on just this morning, is you have microfinance funds. You have people who are able to put money into what you call microfinance investment vehicles, which help to support microfinance institutions. There are lots of microfinance institutions that don't have access to fund. Their funding is just depositors and maybe the members' capital. But because of the tendency of microfinance leading to financial inclusion, I mean, reaching the rural poor, there are lots of development organizations that are willing to put money to support these microfinance institutions. So, I mean, what I've been doing for the past 2 weeks is like, say, look, you have this microfinance investment vehicles, they're looking for where to deploy this money, but they can't find microfinance institutions. Do you have good books that they, because the first thing they'll check is, I mean, do you have, because they'll just go and dump the money anywhere.
With anybody.
Yeah, they won't give it to anybody. So do you have, I mean, are you credible enough? I mean, do you have good records that can really attract this funding, and we can help you to access this, because it's meant for you, what you're trying to, it's meant for your agenda, trying to reach, I mean, the rural for financial inclusion, because we've seen that you can't have economic development without financial inclusion.
So, with these vehicles, and because it looks like a fundamental problem or barrier why we're unable to access these funds is the way in which we do business. So, we for instance, records is a problem. Yeah. Most of the businesses don't keep records, and the few who do, some don't do it right to meet up with these standards. So, do we have to go back to the drawing board and teach Cameroonians and startups and SMEs and say, this is the way you need to do business? And is there funding available for such training?
Yes, I mean, most of the institutions have what we call technical assistance, TA, and we're trying to tap into that so that we could help provide training to these SMEs. That's why my institution, we're not just concerned about the funding. There are lots of, we're looking at the ecosystem in general. So you need to have that capacity building. You need to have the right systems. So, I mean, you're not just putting money, giving a capital, but you need to have the right systems, IT systems where there could be controls. You need to also help to consolidate some of these small enterprises, because a lot of them are too fragmented and such that it doesn't make sense for you to just, I mean, to access funding with your tiny unit. But if you can, if about 10 of you can come together, 10 of you doing the same thing can come together, then it creates an environment which is more conducive for someone to provide you funding. So you're looking at the holistic picture.
So that actually leads me to another question. Will money solve the problem? Because in Cameroon, the business infrastructure is still too lacking in several ways. Already we just have insecurity that has added to it now. Prior to that, we don't have road infrastructure. The internet infrastructure is not the best technologically, generally. So these are all factors that help or that enable adequate use of funding when we get them. So if we don't have this, even if we get the money, would it solve this problem?
That's a very, very good question. And, you know, it boils down to what ACE Foundation is all about. Because at the beginning, I mean, when I heard so many complaints, oh, it's funding, then I got to realize that truly funding is not the major issue. I mean, it's a whole systemic issue. And rather than you coming out, setting up a financial institution to deal with funding, it's better you set up an institution, a foundation that deals with the different problems linked to that major problem, what you call the root cause, because just the funding alone won't solve this issue. I bet you there's a lot of other issues dealing with credibility, dealing with capacity, dealing with infrastructure. I mean, that's why in our mission is to build the financial infrastructure, actually the social financial infrastructure, because most of what we do are linked to social finance and not just pure finance. I mean, if your work hasn't got, if your enterprise hasn't got to do with solving some of the world's wicked problems like poverty, education, health, we don't tend to look at that. So we look at the social problems, and so we're trying to build a social financial infrastructure. Okay. So, but remember, we don't even have the financial infrastructure in place
at all. Yeah.
Yeah. So not to talk of so, but we're trying to look at what's the ecosystem necessary. That's why we're even going into things like advocacy and policy. So in order to, because all of this, in the ecosystem, there are different components of the ecosystem and this social finance or financial ecosystem. So if you look at it holistically, that's when we realize that no, it's not just the money. Capital is just one aspect, just one of the aspects. But there are other issues that need to be solved. And so it's not something that you solve within 1 year or 2 years. But we've taken it as a mission, a life's mission, to try to address this, and we're moving gradually.
Now, this is something that I have wondered about for a while now. Most often, if I'm providing funding, then there are one or two things that I can get in an enterprise or in your company. So either ownership or control. So if I provide, I either own the business and then let you control it, or we find a way that there's 50-50. But in my conversation with most startups and young entrepreneurs and small and medium-sized enterprise owners in Cameroon, what I'm realizing is sometimes these people are skeptical of seeking funding because they are unwilling to give up control. They want to own the business, control the business. I mean, dictate terms. So if it's bad someday and I need to get $1 million out of the account, I don't need to start asking it's my business, I built it. So we don't want this scrutiny or accountability. We want both ownership and control. And the reason I ask this is because only recently, government wanted to raise 150 billion francs CFA to finance activities for the AFCON when we thought we would host. So they issued out bonds and we sold way more. They actually sold bonds for 206 billion. So what that says is there is money. Why don't we have it? The stock exchange is just by us here, and we have 3 companies listed on it. And there are companies that could be listed on the stock exchange, and people would buy shares on an everyday basis. So is it that we're afraid to give up control of our business, or is it, I don't know what else it could be?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very interesting issue, and it's got to do with our mindset. And I encountered that a lot, particularly when you meet entrepreneurs or SME owners and so on. It's just got to do with the mindset issue. And the way I solve this, the way I try to trickle and ask them, tell me, you're trying to maximize your value. Is 10% of 1 billion more than 100% of 1,000 or not? So it's just about, by the time you try to let them see the bigger picture, because what they're saying is just a small picture. You want to get 100% of a small thing instead of 10% of a very big thing. So if you look at, because I've been fortunate to get first-hand coaching from some of the Western entrepreneurs where they try to, how did they overcome this, and you see that it's really a win-win kind of situation. So what most investors would do is to ensure that there is this win-win kind of solution in terms of funding. That is, the interests are aligned. The interests of the owners and investors, they are aligned. That's how you deal with it, such that by the time this thing grows, it's both of us, it's all of us that benefit from it, and it's not just one person. So by the time you look at this, then now the person would try to open up, because it's just a natural instinct. You just want to be greedy. I mean, greed is a natural instinct, but by the time you realize that, look, this thing is for the betterment of everyone, then you say, oh no, I think I'll prefer to go for the bigger thing rather than to go for the smaller thing. But then it's, again, like I said, it's a mindset issue. So we need to turn that mindset issue into something positive, that it's good to get external help which can grow the business. And remember, what's the need hiding? I mean, at the end of the day, it insecures with you. So you're just merely being myopic, short-sighted, self-centered, and you're just not going to survive instead of being open. So is that having that open mindset? Because generally when you have an open mindset, life becomes easier for everyone.
Okay, just as we begin to wrap up on this conversation, now this is Cameroon. This is our practical reality. And we have entrepreneurs out there on the street and SMEs, companies that in our minds even are very big, but they don't know these things that you're talking about. And I'm not sure you'd be surprised, because you should have encountered quite a lot of it, because there are people who think the only way I can get funding is from a bank, and there are some who would not even dare go near a bank. how do we start to break down these barriers that we have in our minds such that we can expand our tentacles and try things in business? We Cameroonians, you want to open a business, and Max, if you're thinking big, you're thinking national. Whereas we have businesses that could be international. So how do we break down these barriers and ensure that Cameroonians start thinking outside of these boundaries?
Well, the first thing we need to do, or which I'm already doing, is to have what you call awareness sessions. So right now, I teach at the university. I'm an adjunct professor at the University of Boyard. Where I teach the MBA students on finance, and particularly this, what I call this alternative finance. So I realized that most of their curriculum was based on traditional finance, but I had to bring into the curriculum alternative finance, things like digital finance, things like venture capital, private equity, different the modern financial
landscape.
Yeah, and that's what I try to teach to my students. Now I'm trying to get technical assistants to take this outside the university area. I want to start with university because these are the future leaders. University students.
For sure.
Now, I'm moving outside to have seminars to broaden the awareness, because it's all about awareness issues. And if a place like Nairobi, I bet you most of these things are already known in a place like Nairobi. That's why the entrepreneurs are, they're booming. Entrepreneurship is really booming in Nairobi because they already have these things there. So it's got to do with awareness, trying to broaden, let people know about these different things. And I bet you they won't just read about them and then know them. They really want to see it applicable, how it works in the country,
everyday life,
in everyday life,
practical realities.
The practical realities, yeah. And so this awareness or knowledge, knowledge share kind of platform that we also have, will do that a lot, and we trying to get some technical assistance with one of the domain financial institutions so that we can we can share this kind of knowledge to the broader public, because financial literacy is a very big thing, and lots of enterprises, I can say they're financially illiterate. So we need to break this financial illiteracy to let them know the different avenues of finance, and they too should be interested in trying to seek consultancy in terms of trying to get advice, financial advice on what are the different avenues, what avenues do I have, what can I explore, because there are just lots of them out there. And we had to get into this because we realized that in Cameroon in particular, these are not being used. And we said, you know what, let's take this thing to the masses. Let's try to push on this and educate the public more. And that's how we not just educating, but also trying to show concrete examples, role models.
Yeah.
So by the time we'll close some of our transactions, these transactions will now be showcased to the market, and from there now people will improve on people's awareness.
All right. Let me end with this paradox of value here, because let's say I'm running a business, and now I hear this and I think, okay, maybe I should contact him and get some financial advice, but that's going to cost me money, and I don't already have money. And for me to think spending money to get financial advice, which is not necessarily part of the core processes of my business, is not something that we're used to doing. So is there a way that you guys break this down for us and make it worth our while as entrepreneurs and daring business people, say, okay, if we go here, we might still be able to break even or catch the shadows?
Yes. Not immediately, but remember, that is a core part of our value proposition, because how do you provide, how can you give this advice to people who can't even afford the advice in the first place?
That's it.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we're trying to work out on a model, whereby we could provide this advice and get paid by some other people. So we're working on that, but we're very conscious of this fact. We're very, very conscious of this, and we're working on trying to see who else can pay for this thing, because remember, it's a general issue. It's going to help in the economic development of the country. It's going to help in providing jobs. It's going to help because by the time these SMEs grow, SMEs are the #1 employers in the whole economy. So we want to help them to grow and employ more people, because we don't want a situation whereby, there's high level of unemployment, and so which can lead to so many social issues and vices. So want to avoid all this kind of stuff, and want to see how we can really help, because at the end of the day, the big guys, they have access to this advice and they are growing. Meanwhile, the small guys don't have, and we have to do something for them.
Thank you very much, sir. That's Mr. Ayok Akwachere Chemone for you. He is Chief Investment Officer of Ace Impact Investment. You can find him on LinkedIn and ask his advice. It won't come cheap, but do. It's very helpful for your business. Thank you very much, sir, for coming and being a part of the show with us today. You've shared some really interesting insights. It's blessed me. I hope it's blessed all our listeners and viewers as well.
Thank you.
Some other time, ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned. Bye-bye for now.